Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another in the series of conversations created by the Jewish Voice for Peace chapter, Central Ohio. I am Farrell Brody, a member of this chapter. This presentation was developed by Michael Lieber, Connie Hammond, and Amy Schuster, all members of this chapter, and it will be moderated by Amy. We want to thank all the JVP chapters who kindly are co-sponsoring this event. You can watch this on Zoom or on YouTube, and listeners may put questions in the chat box, which Amy will monitor and convey the questions to our guest, Jeff Halper, after he concludes his talk. This is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube later, and we will share the link to the recording on Facebook. We ask everyone to please mute themselves during the presentation. Jeff Halper is an American-born anthropologist, author, lecturer, and political activist who has lived in Israel since 1973. He is a co-founder of the People Yes Network and the former founder and director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, and a member of the advisory board of the One State Foundation. Jeff served as the director of the Middle East Center for Friends World College, an international college which he eventually headed, and has taught it at universities in Israel, the US, Latin America, and Africa. In addition to his many academic and political writings, he is the author of An Israeli in Palestine, 2008, on his work against the occupation, and recently, War Amongst the People, Israel, the Palestinians, and Global Pacification, 2015, which was shortlisted for the 2016 Palestine Book Award. And now a new book, Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, Zionism, Settler Colonialism, and the Case for One Democratic State, that is coming out now. Before we turn to Jeff, Barbara Harvey of the Detroit JVP chapter has the floor. Barbara, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Farrell. I really am so delighted to have been asked to just say a few words for just a couple of minutes about Jeff as a person, because he's a pretty fun person. And here are a couple things about his background that not everybody knows. Well, first of all, you probably know he was the founder of ICAD, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolition, and used that organization to bring to the rest of the world, and particularly the Jewish community in the United States, the realization that the demolition of Palestinian homes in the West Bank, and even actually in the state of Israel, even in West Jerusalem, without any lawful premise, whatever, is a vehicle for ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, because the way building permit applications are handled makes it virtually impossible for a Palestinian person to even replace a 30 or 40-year-old roof on the house, because the permits are not granted to Palestinians. And so the roof collapses, requiring the people who live there to leave. And it's heartless. It's it's a crime under international law. It's been a very effective and powerful weapon for the movement to raise consciousness about the situation Palestinians face in Israel and in the West Bank and Gaza. And that is how Jeff operates. Jeff, we all have different brains, and there are different kinds of brains. Jeff has one of those rare gifts that is a brain that thinks conceptually in the bigger picture. And that's what the creation of ICAD reflects. He thinks of the conditions for life in the West Bank, and even more dramatically so in Gaza, are effectively an open air prison. And that term also has brought an enormous, powerful recognition that Palestinians live under circumstances that certainly the Jewish community in this country really was blissfully unaware of until some of these points were brought home by Jeff's thinking. And most importantly, and I'll end with this one, something many of you may not know is that Jeff went to high school in Western Minnesota, where one of his classmates was another Jewish guy named Bob Zimmerman. And by God, later that guy, the name Dylan. And I think this is by far, well, this is what blows me away about Jeff more than anything else, that he went to high school with Bob Dylan. It was just amazing. I'm so jealous. Thank you, Jeff, for everything else you've done.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Barbara. And now we'll turn to Amy Schuster to begin the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farrell. And Jeff, welcome so much. I think I let you know, I've just finished reading your book, and I'm still wrestling with all of the pieces of it. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I wanted to ask you if you could just start off and begin where you would have us begin. You know that I have some questions for you, but I would love for you to be able to tell us where you would like to begin.
Well, first of all, thank you all for inviting me and attending. I have to admit it's easier to walk across the street to my study and get on Zoom than it is to fly to all of your communities and hang out with you all and have dinner with you all, although I enjoyed it, and then meet in the church basement for a talk. So this is kind of luxurious, even though the circumstances aren't quite great. And I guess it's like Barbara, was sort of saying, I see this as a continuation of my political work all these years. I did go to school with Bob Dylan, that's true, with Bob Zimmerman, although he's older than I am, I have to say. So I guess there's something in the water in Hibbing, Minnesota that gets us thinking, because actually, besides Bob Dylan, you know who else is from Hibbing? Gus Hall, who was the head of the American Communist Party for about 60 years. So we have some interesting lineages in Hibbing. At any rate, I brought my 60s activism to Israel when I came, which is a whole different story. And I've tried to be very active all these years in terms of trying to resolve this issue between Israelis and Palestinians. Mm. So the book I just wrote, I've written a number of books, of course, but the book I just wrote, Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, isn't intended to be an academic book, although I realize that I'm not a popular writer. The best I can get is clear academic writing, hopefully readable. But certainly the idea is to make the analysis available to the wider public. I mean, this whole analysis that we'll talk about in a few minutes of settler colonialism actually is very, very developed in the academic world. I mean, there's journals of settler colonialism, there's 1,000 articles. It isn't anything really new in a way. I've done with it some new things, but the analysis itself is not so new. But it hasn't percolated into the popular discussion. Because, you know, even the term settler colonialism is way too academic for most, you know, it doesn't exactly flow off your tongue. And then you put in decolonization, and, you know, what in the hell does that mean? So when you talk about occupation, apartheid, conflict, I mean, those are terms that people can get, even if they don't know all the details. Unfortunately, they're not the right terms, or they're terms that we have to go beyond. And the settler colonial analysis, as we'll talk about, is very powerful. So the trick is, and we haven't exactly found the key yet, is how to translate this academic concept of settler colonialism and decolonization that has to take place in order to resolve this whole thing into terms that people can pick up on and use and understand. And that's not going to be easy, but hopefully the book that I just wrote is a contribution towards that, at least.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I do hope that we get into some of those details. So you start off also talking, the word you use is positionality. That's another kind of academic word, but let me just make it a little bit more biographical. As I understood it, again, I had to read it quickly because I just got it last week, but as I understood it, you had originally planned to write this book with a Palestinian colleague, and you decided not to. So can you tell us a little bit, you know, especially for those who haven't read the book, where that came from? And you had said, well, we felt like a shared analysis needed to come, but first there needed to be this separate analysis. So maybe a little bit more about why the separate analysis needed to come first.
Well, you know, obviously the gap or the chasm between a settler colonial population and an indigenous colonized population is tremendous. I mean, for years we've talked about dialogue groups and ways of talking to each other and so on. But obviously the power differentials and the agendas and the experiences are so hugely different that it's not easy, even when you're part of the struggle. And you know, I define myself as a settler, you know, a settler who refuses. It's sort of a term I took from Albert Memmi, who a Jewish fellow who was very involved in the Tunisian Revolution. The settler who refuses. But nevertheless, I can't deny I'm a settler. I mean, we just talked about my coming from northern Minnesota. So there's a story there. And I came here and I was, and regardless of how I think this should be resolved, I am a part of this settler enterprise, even though I'm trying to refuse it and to reverse it to some degree. But obviously, I do feel a tie to the country, and obviously, I'm not a Palestinian, so I certainly can't speak for, represent Palestinians. On the other hand, of course, I work very closely with Palestinians, and the idea was actually to write this book with a Palestinian. We even had an outline worked out and everything else. But it just turned out that the bridging was too hard. You know, in other words, there wasn't really a bridging. We could talk kind of parallel to each other. We could agree that I think we have agreed, because I'm part of a Palestinian-led one democratic state campaign. So, I mean, we can get to some agreement politically in terms of moving ahead. But in terms of, you know, we just simply, as we were writing the draft, and I was writing about Zionism, as critical as I am, and it was a woman, actually, a professor, I won't use her name, but, you know, as a Palestinian, I mean, she was coming from a completely different direction. And in that part of the book where we're sort of laying out, even though we agreed on the settler colonial analysis, there was no way to put those things together, the perspectives. And I would do violence to her if I would force her to accept my language, even to agree to some of my assumptions. And obviously the other way around as well. So what I thought in the end, what we both saw is better if one person wrote the book, hopefully a Palestinian, maybe she or someone else, will write the same book from a Palestinian point of view, because it'll come out completely different. The emphases will be different, besides some of the technical terms, a lot of the language will be different. I think the historical framework could be very different. Things that I think were important aren't things that a Palestinian would think necessarily is so important. And and I think that would be the best way actually to approach this kind of a thing, to have two parallel works that people can put together themselves, but each one stands on its own, because there was simply no way to really integrate the two.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I think about like Benedict Anderson's Imagine Communities, right? That we don't have a common narrative yet, and
That's
I see that in your book that you want to build a common narrative in the future without necessarily having to agree on a common narrative in the past. So that's really helpful. Thank you. So it seems to me that like the big distinction you make early in the book is between thinking about this as a problem in conflict resolution and thinking about this as a problem of decolonization. And so maybe before we move to where we should be, which is the decolonization, can you just remind us, like, how do we think about this problem when we think about it from the conflict resolution perspective?
Well, this is really, I think, the contribution of the settler colonial analysis. It isn't just another term. It's a completely, fundamentally different way of looking at this situation. I'm trying to avoid the word conflict. And that is that it's not a conflict. You see, I begin the book by saying analysis matters, because the language you use and the frameworks you use for analysis determine what conclusions you're going to come to. And so it's very important to have the right analysis. What we've been suffering all these years is from a wrong analysis that has led us to a wrong political program. Because the analysis has always been based on a conflict. We talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We always use the word conflict. Matter of fact, it's even hard to find a synonym for conflict if you don't want to use that term. But it's not a conflict. A conflict is when you have a conflict between two or more sides who are fighting over something. And then there's a rough equivalence of sides. And the way you resolve a conflict is the sides come together, they compromise, they negotiate, and they get to some kind of an agreement. That might resolve things, might not, but peace, we call it peacemaking or whatever we call it. But that's not what's happening here, because the Zionist movement was a settler colonial movement, meaning that it's the intention of the Zionist movement, and they were very upfront about it. This isn't hidden anywhere. They were yelling this in megaphones as they were doing it until today. The purpose of the Zionist movement was to take over Palestine. They didn't come as immigrants, you see. It's not like, there were Jews that had come to this country for centuries. There was a Jewish community here before Zionism, but they came as immigrants or as pilgrims even. They came for their religious reasons or whatever, but they integrated into the society that existed. A settler colonial movement in the United States is another example of a settler colonial movement, is when a population comes from the outside with the intention of taking over the country. So that every settler colonial movement then develops a narrative, a story about why the country belongs to them, why we, the settlers, are really the natives, and why the indigenous population has no role whatsoever. In other words, they're not a side. Settler colonialism is unilateral. There is no other side. The Zionists never asked the Palestinians, could we come? They never asked them, what do you think of us living with you? What do you think of us buying the land? What do you think of us turning? The whole idea was to transform an Arab country into a Jewish country, to transform Palestine into the land of Israel. And there wasn't another side. It was a unilateral decision that was made, and step by step. And that's why I try to reframe the whole Zionist history in the first part of the book, is with that single-minded goal. And we even had a term for it. The term we used was, and we still use, is Judaization. It's not a term we use very often because it doesn't have a legal reference. It isn't like apartheid or conquest or occupation or regular colonialism. But Judaization is that concept. And we're in other words, the idea is, again, to take a country that we claim to be ours, in which the indigenous Palestinians have no claim, no rights. Until today, Israel has not recognized the national existence of a Palestinian people or its national rights. And it can't do that because that would undermine its own exclusive entitlement to the country, you see? So that's where it's not a conflict. And so that the whole idea then of the two-state solution is ridiculous, because the Zionist movement did not come, and you could see it as clearly today as you could a century ago. It did not come in order to take 78% of the country, or 50% of the country, or 90% of the country. It came to take the entire country from actually even beyond the Jordan River, but certainly between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. This was the land of Israel. And that continues to be the purpose of it. So the idea that somehow they're going to negotiate with another side, there isn't another side. The indigenous are not another side. What you do with the indigenous is you displace them, you throw them out, you confine them, you eliminate them. That's the word that's used in settler colonialism. You eliminate the indigenous population, but you don't negotiate with them. Again, they're not a side. And unless we understand that fundamental dynamic of settler colonialism and what its goals are, you're not going to get, so in other words, you're not going to get, settler colonialism does not lead to a two-state solution. It does not lead to negotiations. It doesn't lead to sides. It leads to what we're going to, apartheid, which is the intermediate right now stage that we're in, because you can't get rid of the indigenous completely. You can find them into little enclaves like Bantustans, but eventually it's to eliminate them completely in one way or another.
Thank you.
And so just the last idea then is that the only way then out of a settler colonial situation is a process of decolonization. That leads us to decolonization rather than to conflict resolution.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to get into the details there. But for especially the dominance management system. But before we get there, in the very end of your book, you address something that I think is helpful to insert even right now, which is that when you accept or when you start talking about most Jewish Israelis as settlers, you say one concern is that it delegitimizes Jewish presence in the space or Zionism, and you make this distinction between political Zionism as it's come to be embodied in dominant parties in Israel today, and cultural Zionism. And I heard a very gentle criticism, actually, of the JVP statement that came out against Zionism, which you quote in the beginning of your book, just to remind all of us, so it's at the tip of our tongues. Jewish Voice for Peace, our statement reads that we've found that Zionism is a false and failed answer to the desperately real question many of our ancestors faced of how to protect Jewish lives from murderous anti-Semitism in Europe. So I don't know if that's two questions or one, but is there a gentle criticism? I'd love to hear it, or at least have it be voiced if that's the case, a gentle criticism of the JVP statement and some kind of place for something like a cultural Zionism, and in that one democratic state that is to come. And when that one democratic state does accept a historical label for Jewish settlers, does that then delegitimize their presence in that space? Thanks.
Well, they are two different questions, and I'll try to do it pithily. First of all, let me start with the JVP statement. the GVP, the JVP statement, I think was excellent. I mean, really, to have a major Jewish organization in the United States actually use the term anti-Zionist, it really takes a lot of courage. And I thought it was a very good statement. But and in a way, it's as far as you could go. I mean, I wasn't criticizing the statement, but for someone who wants to resolve this colonial, wants to decolonize, wants to get to some kind of a just resolution, you have to have a political program. And the only ones that can really articulate a political program are Palestinians. I mean, this has to be led by Palestinians. It's their struggle for liberation, supported by Israeli Jews like me and others. In other words, in a sense, we're the stakeholders. So we're the only ones, but we, the Israeli Jews, are the junior partners to the Palestinians, are really the only ones that can say what is the political program. In other words, you can't in the United States, obviously, as much as you might support Palestinian rights, determine what the solution is or what the political program is. That's not your role. So what I'm trying to suggest is that as a Palestinian-led movement and voice and political program begins to emerge, hopefully through this one democratic state campaign, and it's beginning to emerge and get stronger within Palestinian society, then that gives you, as Americans, a Palestinian voice to follow. People say, look, we can't accept the one-state solution now because we have to listen to the Palestinians, which is true. And the only Palestinian voice you've heard until now is the Palestinian Authority, which isn't really a legitimate voice of the Palestinian people. So to the degree that our group and the Palestinians in our group can become a voice, a significant voice of the Palestinian people, then that gives you something to do with your anti-Zionism. Because when you say to American Jews, we're anti-Zionist, you're bringing them out like halfway out of their paradigm. But then you sort of leave them hanging. Well, what do I do with that? What does an anti-Zionist Jew do in the United States? You get alienated from your own community. You know, how is that related to my Jewishness? Am I becoming a self-hating Jew? Am I denigrating an important part of my identity? So if we as Israeli Jews with the Palestinians can build the other half of the bridge and say, we have somewhere for you to go with your anti-Zionism. You can go towards wishing the new country of Palestine, Israel, whatever it's going to be called, well, and wishing the Jews in Israel to be a part of a new society, a new political community that gives them all the rights and their identity, but nevertheless within a new country of equality, which then frees you as American Jews to validate your own life. Because, you know, one of the key elements of Zionism, the people aren't always aware of, but they feel it, the American Jews, is what's called the negation of the exile. For Zionism, Jews living abroad, like Barbara in Detroit, are Jews living on borrowed time. They're living an ephemeral life. It isn't real. Their only real Jewish identity is pro-Israeli. And only when you come here are you fully Jewish. And I think there's a resistance to that, especially among young Jews today. There's Jewish music festivals, Jewish film festivals, even a revival of Yiddish study in universities. I mean, I think there's a revalidation of a Jewish identity in the diaspora or internationally that always existed, but it has to be freed from Zionism. Because if anything defines the vast majority of American Jews, I think it's social justice and human rights in one way or another, even if it's only liberalism. Whereas Israel is an apartheid, racist, colonial ideology. You can't possibly reconcile those two parts of your identity. So if the Jewish Voice for Peace statement can bring Jews out of that Zionist-defined paradigm into a healthier form of Judaism by helping them to disconnect from Zionism and then we can give them politically somewhere to go, so Israeli Jews will be safe and sound and happy, then in a sense, I think we've done something really good. So what I'm trying to work with JVP to tie their statement to our political program, and that I think would complete that kind of a step that the JVP took. Now, you still want me to go into the second question, or it's getting long?
No, I think the second question is really important. So if an Israeli accepts the moniker of settler, does that delegitimize any claim to remain or to be in the state of Israel right now?
Right. That's of course, I think people feel that if I'm a settler colonial, then I have to go home. Well, there is no home, and there is no. You're not going to go back to Germany or Poland or Russia. I mean, there is no home in a sense from that point of view. But no, I don't think it's, what we're saying, part of our program, we have a 10-point program. So I think what we've done is really think through the whole issue all the way through until how to resolve it. And one of the points is that people have a right to their collective identity, their national identity. We recognize that this is a multicultural society here. You have different national groups here. You have different ethnic groups, different religious groups, different gender groups. It's really a very diverse, we've got about 30-some thousand African asylum seekers that are becoming a part of the society here. So it's a much more diverse population than isn't only Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs. So the idea is that everyone has their identity, and that's the cultural Zionism part. You see, political Zionism, there were always two streams of Zionism. You see, and this is the thing, I can get into a critical discussion of this from a Zionist perspective that I think is important for reaching the Jewish community. That's why I couldn't write the book with my Palestinian partner, because she's not going to be a part of a liberal Zionist interpretation of this. So you see the problem there. But the point is that political Zionism said that we need a state, we need an army, we have to conquer. This was really the expression of that form of settler colonialism. We have to take over the country. And that really won out. That's the kind of Zionism you have today that I don't accept. That's where I'm a settler who refuses. And that's led to nowhere. That's led to apartheid. It's a dead end. But there was another stream of Zionism from the very beginning, more of eggheads, intellectuals. So they never organized politically. They never had a party. They were never strong. But it was there. It was called cultural Zionism. And they said, and there were some very important people. Martin Buber was a part of it. And Judah Magnus, who was the first president of the Hebrew University, and Eliezer ben Yehuda, who was the founder of the modern Hebrew language, and Henrietta Zold, who started the Hadassah hospital system. I mean, there were some very important intellectual figures, and they said exactly that about being settled. Yes, we see this as our homeland. We want to come back. We want to even develop a national presence here, but we don't need a state to do that. We can come, live here, settle here, even kind of as immigrants, and we can live together with the Palestinians, and together in a parallel way, we can develop our national identities. There doesn't have to be a conflict, that we can do that. Well, that was, especially after 1948, that was kind of eliminated to a degree. But it stayed, there was a certain little undercurrent of intellectuals. And today, I think that form of Zionism is the only way out. In other words, what I'm saying is that even though Zionists were settlers, in the end, they're going to stay. This isn't Algeria, where the settlers leave or are driven out. They're going to stay here. So the question is, how can Israelis stay here? even as Israelis as they want to be, although there'll be a wider national identity emerging, how can they stay here and in a sense become part of a new political community? How can they transcend their settler status? You see, and I think cultural Zionism is the way out, because it's very possible to reject the settler part of Zionism without rejecting a genuine connection that Jews might feel to this country.
Hmm.
So if you can build on a genuine feeling and then say, all right, all together we can build a new country, and here's the way to build a new local community, I think we can transform the settler identity of political Zionism into a wider political community in which cultural Zionism has a place, like a lot of other ideologies will have a place in that society.
Hmm.
I don't know if
Thank
that's
No,
clear.
that is very helpful, and I thought it was clear in the book. So I thought you did a great job making it clear here. So what I'm hearing is that an Israeli would call themselves a settler by acknowledging that the thing that brought them there, or bring the thing that brought their ancestors there, was a connection to the land, and that's the cultural form. And then there's this particular political instantiation that connection to the land expressed itself in terms of this settler colonialism. So it's this
And the acknowledgement is very important.
mm,
I mean,
yeah.
that's the key in a sense. You know, we'll build this country together and so on, but there has to be a point where the Zionist Jews say, yes, we acknowledge what we've done, even the crimes that we've committed, and we want to ask for some, you know, some kind of forgiveness, maybe some reparations or whatever it is. There are ways of moving on that I think the Palestinians will then respond to if we get to a situation of equality in the country
Thank
and the
you.
return of refugees.
Great. Yeah, I know there's a question bubbling in the chat about how a boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement might fit into this plan, but it seems to me that we first have to get more solidly on the table what decolonization entails, and then how BDS does or does not fit into that decolonization process. So I saw from the book, you said, I'm an academic, so my words are going to be a little bit more academic, but you have this dominance management system that has foundational violence, and you do some history. We don't have to talk about the history, but it seemed to me that there are these 4 different ways that population management, land management, economic management, management of legitimacy, that formed this dominance management system, if I got it correctly. And I guess this is just an invitation to talk a little bit about that, and as colonizing strategies that then a decolonization process would need to target, I guess, if I got that right.
No, that's very good. Look, decolonization is a difficult concept. And in fact, it means some different things as well. You know, when we talk about normal colonialism, classic colonialism, let's think about the British in India. I mean, that was a simpler sort of a thing. The British conquered India, and they conquered it not in order to take over the country, in the sense that they weren't going to make the Indians British, or they weren't going to make India a part of Britain, but they were going to simply extract the resources, exploit the cheap labor, you know, use India for those purposes. Settler colonialism, again, is where the intention is to take over the country and resettle it and redo the whole country as our country instead of their country. So the only way out, as I said before, is to decolonize. Well, decolonization of India was simpler. That simply meant the British get up and they leave India, and India becomes an independent country with its own political parties and takes over its own life. But what do you do in a settler colonial situation where the settlers don't leave? You know, in fact, where the settlers are a very strong part of the society, like in Israel, or closest to Israel is South Africa. You know, we had a very strong minority white population that really dominated the government and dominated the country under the apartheid regime. So decolonization then means, you know, it begins with the process that I laid out in what I call the settler colonial movement. Everyone, I mean, it's interesting, whether it's the United States or Canada or Australia or New Zealand or the French in Algeria or in Kenya or different places, it's very similar. I have a whole outline of the stages of settler colonialism and how you take over the country. And the idea in the end is that you normalize the country, in its settler form. So you think of Israel as a Jewish country, and you don't even think about the Palestinians. You don't even think about the indigenous population. So that part of the process of decolonization is to dismantle the colonial structures of domination and control that the settlers have erected in order to keep their control. And what the settlers do, it begins with what I call foundational violence. I mean, every settler colonial movement begins with violence, whether it's the Indian Wars or the wars against the indigenous peoples in Australia, or the wars we had here, in the first half or more of the 20th century. There was a conquest element and taking the land and displacing the population. But as I said, the goal of settler colonialism is to achieve a normalization. So in the end, you want to try to hide that. You see, Zionism tries to hide the conflicts of the past in a way and present itself as, we're the peaceable settlers, just like in the cowboy movies. The cowboys and the settlers and the American West wanted peace, and the Indians were the ones that were the hostiles. They were the ones that were fighting. They were the ones that were attacking. So you try to both demonize that population in order to explain that, but you present yourself as a peaceful, normal population trying to normalize. And this, of course, is what Netanyahu, and this is where Trump was helping Netanyahu, the whole idea of normalization. That became the name of Trump's Middle East policy with the Emirates and the other countries and so on. And that's what Israel's trying to do with the Palestinians, is to normalize its domination over the Palestinians. So you have to dismantle those mechanisms. Some of them are actual mechanisms of control that you can put your finger on: control of land, control of the economy, political controls. We have that. I mean, that's very clear here. The whole settlement enterprise here, and so on. House demolitions, even. But some of the controls are very subtle. And, a lot of Africans have written about the colonization of the mind. So I'll just give you one example. Nadia Nasser Najab, who's a Palestinian professor who wrote the foreword to my book, has done research with the leaders of the Palestinian Authority. And when she asks them, and you hear this a lot with Palestinians, talk about a one-state solution, the answer is, the Israelis would never allow it. Well, that's kind of a colonization of the mind, because right away, as the indigenous colonized population, you can only imagine a solution within the parameters that the colonists would agree to. You see, you lose even your own sense of what your own liberation entails. And so those more subtle, even psychological forms of domination and control, those mechanisms have to be dismantled as well. And then you get into, what I write about in the book. Then you get into, our political plan of how exactly you redistribute land and how you set up a government, how you set up all of that rebuilding of the society. But the decolonization has to begin with the dismantling of those structures of domination and control.
Can I press you on that idea about the colonization of the mind for just a moment? So I don't want to go too far later into the book, but when you do get into that one state campaign, you talk about in the end, it may be that the one democratic state needs to be imposed on Jewish Israelis, and that it won't be inaugurated by them, though the process after the state is created of building that shared political community would include them. And so Is that a way of narrowing the gap between those two thoughts, or is there something else going on there?
Well, I mean, it also works the other way around. You have to decolonize the mind of the colonizers as well. I mean, they're used to being colonizers, and in a sense, for Israelis, it's a non-starter. You're talking about the one state. What motivation would they have to do that? I mean, they're the dominant population. They've defined the country. They're normalizing it in their own image. They have control. They're benefiting even from the occupation in all kinds of ways that I write about in my last book. What motivation would they have to end it? And so I think that gets into issues of strategy, you see, because this question of, well, the Israelis won't allow it is an important question, because it's true. The Israelis won't allow it. Now, you can say, when that's said, that becomes an obstacle that's insurmountable. The Israelis won't allow it. It's a dead end now. I don't know what we do now. But it was like South Africa had the same situation. Is that the whites in South Africa were the dominant economically, politically, militarily population that had the government. They were never going to be active partners in dismantling apartheid. I mean, the ANC knew that. That wasn't anything new. But they took that as a challenge. And what they did was they bypassed the white population in South Africa. Mandela didn't spend his time trying to convince white people that apartheid is bad. It's not going to happen. And even monkeying around with the apartheid government. Now, what we have to also remember is the governments of the world were against the ANC. Reagan, Thatcher, and a lot of the European governments, Israel was very much in bed with the apartheid regime. Even they had nuclear programs, nuclear bomb programs together and stuff. So now what do? Well, what the ANC did was they bypassed all of those, and they went right to the international civil society, which is you guys. That's why you're so important. That's why JVP is so important, for example, because they went to churches, religious groups, trade unions, intellectual groups, students. I mean, a lot of us of a certain age remember the anti-apartheid struggle, and it became a worldwide struggle for their rights. And then we began, because of our anti-apartheid campaigns in our own countries, we managed to change our own government's policies towards South Africa. And we managed to make South Africa so immoral to be involved with that's the BDS part of it. Then companies began to pull out, because they didn't want to be associated with South Africa, and the sports boycott and so on. So what we're suggesting is that the Palestinians, in a sense, have a similar situation and can adopt that kind of a strategy. And that is we have to bypass the Israeli population. We're never going to explain this to Israelis. They're not going to listen to it. Just to give you a tiny little story, we're having an election in March here. So the Labor Party, that used to be the Labor Party of Rabin and all these, is now down to 5 or 6 people, is trying to revive itself. And the woman that's heading the Labor Party now, and we talked the other day about occupation, kibush in Hebrew, and it created a sensation. It's the first time Israelis have heard the word occupation for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
No party talks about occupation. Even the Joint Arab List doesn't talk about it. All of a sudden, it's like a radical party emerges. It was the Labor Party, which is a Zionist party. But even the term occupation, Israelis can't deal with, let alone everything else. So we have to kind of bite that bullet and develop a strategy that bypasses them. And that's where I think if we can begin to insert a political program into this, you're already there. There already is an infrastructure of worldwide support for the Palestinians. We're not starting from scratch, but again, you're lacking the program to advocate for, to mobilize around. And we have to do that. I think we have to, led by Palestinians, have to do that mobilization. And then I think we have a good chance to actually succeed, I have to say.
Great. Yeah. So I think that's a great pivot to that political program that you wanted to talk about in the book. So so you talk a little bit about the tripartite alliance, which I think you're alluding to right now. This alliance of the settlers who refuse, Palestinians that are in the occupied territories in Jordan and in the diaspora, and then the international community. And your thought is that there is a robust resistance, and that we can, rather than thinking about this as like reactionary violence or terrorism, if we can understand this not in terms of a conflict, but in terms of settler society and the reaction or resistance is the word that you want to use. And you talk a little bit about the very kind of fecund resistance that has persisted for the past 50 or more years. So you suggest that there's this resistance, and the shortcoming is that there's a lack of you say a political end game, I think is the word. And that feels like it rings true to me, right? That and as a member of JVP, as a Jew in the diaspora, I might have private ideas about maybe the kinds of conclusions to this or futures to this that I would prefer. But it's not my position to be advocating for any particular kind of solution. And it seems to me that the second very gentle criticism that you want to offer to Jewish Voice for Peace members is that we lack a political end game, and that something like, and you say it's it's initial, it's not firm. There are still things that need to be worked out, and I'd love to get to that. But you seem to suggest that we need a political end game, and that what that should be is something like the One Democratic State campaign. So I wanted to start talking about that campaign. I've shared a link to it in the chat in Zoom in case people wanted to look at the website that you shared in your book. But it's got these 10 points, and I'm just looking at our time, so I don't know that we'll be able to spend all of them deeply. But you start off and you say the first thing is decolonization, right? So that's first just recognizing that this is a situation of coloniality, and that we don't want neocolonialism. We don't want the replace of one elites with another kind of elite structure. We want to said to me that my internet connection is unstable. So I apologize if you guys can't hear me very clearly. So, so we need to actually identify that there are systems of population control, of land control, of economic, just understanding what the economic system would be like and who gets to make decisions about that, and regimes or ideologies of legitimacy about the existing political structure that need to change. And get replaced by a single constitutional democracy. And then if we can maybe go into a little bit more detail. So those are sort of the first 2 points. And if we could maybe go into a little bit more detail to later points, if that works for you. The third point is that there needs to be, as a part of that single constitutional democracy, the affirmation of the right to return, but not only the right to return, the right to restoration and reintegration. And I would just like to invite you to say a little bit more about. I know it's unsettled, but what's your vision there about what that would look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go through, the whole political program, but I think it's you see that I think is really the strength of our little movement right now, the One Democratic State campaign, and that is in a way we've broken through a tremendous obstacle by coming up with. It took us a couple of years coming up with a joint program. I mean, it's a good, solid program, and what we've done, and that's reflected in the book, is again, we've thought through the whole process from what is the problem in settler colonialism all the way through how to resolve it through decolonization and creating a new political community. So I think we've done that heavy lifting in a sense. And now we've got, I mean, we still have a lot of fleshing out to do, obviously, and it has to be participatory, and more people have to come in, and we'll have many more discussions and so on. But I think we've got a very good solid direction and framework for that kind of a plan. And the idea is fairly straightforward. In other words, there's nothing. We're talking about a constitutional democracy between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. One person, one vote. It's not binational. It's not a federation. It's not a confederation. It's in a way like the United States. In other words, it's a democracy. One person, one vote. There's one parliament. There's one citizenship. There's one set of laws, and everybody is together as equal individual citizens. And that's, I think, the basis of this.
So just to put a point on it, so the right of return is a right to return with equal civil status, not a right to return to particular property?
Well, then the right of return comes in. For Palestinians, that's actually number one. Or, we have a number 2 on our list, but the right of return. Now, the right of return, again, I think what you touched on it, the right of return, first of all, isn't only a right. I mean, it is a right of refugees to return to their homes or to their country. But there's something else here. We're talking about citizenship, equal citizenship, because that's what we're missing today, is even the concept of citizenship. Because citizenship here is defined by your religious and ethnic and national identity, not by the country you live in. So everybody would be a citizen. Now that introduces a logic to this, so that the refugees have a right to come back, not only because they have a right to come back, but because they're our citizens. And we want them to come back. We want them to come home. In other words, just because you're driven out of the country during a war, or you flee the country during the war, doesn't mean you lose your civil status. You lose your citizenship. So that citizenship is there for them, and they are our citizens, and therefore they should come back. So this whole one state idea has a logic to it that's very compelling, beyond the formal rights that different people have. Now, the question is, well, what would come, I mean, that's a very nice statement, but how do they really come back? So we have to think about how would they come back and how would they reintegrate into the society? Because they're a traumatized population, many of whom are undereducated, underemployed, if employed at all. Some of them, like in Lebanon, have lived in terrible conditions. How do we reintegrate them into the society? And there's all kinds of things. I won't get into it now, but for example, there's a Palestinian geographer named Salman Abu Sita, who has done a lot of research on this, and he's discovered that 85% of the land taken from the Palestinians in 1948 is still available. It's either farmland that the kibbutzim and the moshavim took over, or it's under national parks, but it's still there. So that, all right, the houses aren't there. More than 530 entire towns and villages and urban neighborhoods were destroyed by Israel systematically. So it's likely that your house isn't there. But nonetheless, you can come back to the area of the country where you're from. Now, there's a whole project of Zochrot, which is an Israeli organization dedicated to not just the right of return, but actually preparing for the return. And they have a whole project, you can look it up on their website, of young Palestinian architects and planners who have planned modern communities for these areas of the country where the refugees would come back. So they would come back to modern communities. You're not going to come back to some house from 1948. It has a modern infrastructure. It'll have an economy. You'll be integrated, of course, with other people here. So the idea is that you're coming back and you can be reintegrated. That's what I mean by thinking it through. Now, there's a lot more that has to be done, but what we've been trying to do is to take these basic elements of what has to be done and really try to think through how are we going to do them. So, for example, that has to do with the land regime. Well, you see, there's decisions that still have to be made. Do we want a land regime based on personal property? in which we redistribute land and everybody gets 40 acres and a mule? Or do we want maybe to retain the Israeli system, which isn't a bad system, of state-owned land, that allows a much more rational kind of planning, as long as everybody has access to the decision-making about how the land is being used. And that gets into issues of economy, because we haven't really fleshed out, the economic issue. We don't want another neoliberal. Is there going to be a point to liberate Palestine, liberate Palestinians, get everybody to come home, and then we have another neoliberal economy? So all you're doing, like you said before, is replacing one form of elitism with another form of elitism. So do we want a socialist economy? Now that gets into other parts of our program. How, if we had a socialist economy here, which is our idea, I'm not so sure that's the idea of the vast majority of Palestinians and Israelis, but that's our idea. How would that articulate with the economies of the region that are pre-industrial to some degree? You see, there's all kinds of issues that we've got to really, and in the end, you can't decolonize one country in isolation. So we're going to have to deal with the wider Middle East. And what we're trying to do now is connect to human rights groups and activist groups in the Arab countries around, which is not easy, to try to get to some kind of a regional thing. So in other words, each of these things is important, but each of them, goes on and on and on in terms of things that have to be thought about and planned, and we try to do. But just one more thing I want to say, and that is that the people, so everybody can live wherever they want to in the country. So settlers can stay in Hebron. I mean, they wouldn't be settlers anymore, but Jews can live in Hebron. Everybody lives wherever they want to in the country. But like I said, which I think is an important part of our program, which is a controversial part, everyone has the right to keep their collective rights as well. So in other words, their collective identities. Because we understand that this isn't Nebraska. We're not just a bunch of individual voters. There's a Palestinian Arab national identity. There's an Israeli Jewish national identity. There's strong ethnic identities, religious, and so on. And those also have to be taken into account.
Great. I actually do want to go deeper there. So, so the third point is, or the fourth point is individual rights. I don't want to go too much into detail there, but this is a kind of way of fleshing out some of the limitations that have to be part of any kind of constitutional democracy that gets adopted. It seems to me that those are mostly rights of against discrimination, so anti-discrimination. And then and then the fifth point is these collective rights. And what I saw in that section was a distinction, and I want to invite you to say more about, by collective rights, you mean something like the freedom of association and something more than that. But then you say the something more could either be binationalism or shared sovereignty, and you reject binationalism. And so I think it might be helpful to say a little bit more about what you mean by shared sovereignty versus binationalism.
All right, two more things I want to say. One is, we're talking about what we call a unitary state. We're not against a binational state. In other words, if in the end that's what people really want, I mean, I could live with that, certainly. But I think the idea was for the Palestinians in particular, I mean, that'd be easiest to sell Israeli Jews, although they're not buying anything. But if they had to buy something, they'd buy a binational state before a unitary state of equal individual rights. But that's not acceptable to most Palestinians, because Palestinians will say to us, look, we understand the Israelis are going to stay. We know that they're not leaving. We're not going to throw them out. We're doomed to live together. All right, we'll live together. But if this is a binational state, you're forcing me to legitimize a settler colonial identity. You're forcing me to legitimize and recognize Zionism as a legitimate political movement. And we're not going to do that as Palestinians. We can't do that. So don't force me by a binational idea to have to say, yes, Israeli Jews really belong here and Zionism is okay. We're not going to do that. So the path of least resistance for us was to leave that aside. Israeli Jews can identify as Zionists as they want to. They can have whatever, they can organize a community however they want to. But in terms of the society, we're all simply a new civil society. And that's the second point I want to make. It's really important, and that is that there's different levels. So we would be in a new state. We don't have the name for the state yet because the name of the state will actually come with when the new civil society emerges. My famous joke. I have one joke that I made up in my life that I always have to, and that is, if you want an inclusive name, we could call it Palestine. If you spelled Stein, Stein. Yeah, that's inclusive, but okay. Fortunately, you can't hear laughing over Zoom. At any rate, what I'm trying to say is that you would have one new state and a new civil society emerging. But a civil society, that's important. But there's something beyond civil society where the people really begin to come together. And that's what's called a political community. That's one step further. So for example, if we have one state, we'll all have a common civil society like you have in the US, we'll all be in the same elections, we'll be working together, living together, in everyday life. But everyday life leads somewhere. So I'll just give you one example of what I would call nation building. Football, or here you call it soccer, but international, there's an Israeli national soccer team, football team, and a Palestinian national football team. And neither one has succeeded in getting into the World Cup. And it's hard to describe what a big deal the World Cup is. You remember last time Croatia was discovered as a country in the World Cup. I mean, it's a huge thing. Well, and in the FIFA standings, FIFA is the football federation. Actually, the Palestinian national football team has a higher ranking than the Israeli team. What if in this new one country we've developed, our joint national team actually gets into the World Cup? Well, can you imagine the excitement that's where a civil society gets behind our team. And that's where political communities, new forms of solidarity begin to emerge, over in daily life like that. So that's, I think, the final, that together with the reconciliation process, that's, if a new political community emerges, that's the final stage of decolonization.
So you want to reject binationalism. You accept the criticism of binationalism that people like Omar Barghouti have offered of it, and instead build up this point number 7, this new civil society, this new political community, not based, and you actually are kind of like pessimistic. You're like, not based upon some shared narrative of our common past,
That's right.
but some appreciation that our links, that our fates are linked into the future, and maybe not an appreciation, but just an acceptance and an effort even to preserve the fates being linked. All peoples in this new state would be linked in the future. And there's a question in the chat, by the way. I just want to add on to that. How would that system of shared sovereignty under this new democratic constitutional state be different from Lebanon? I think was one of the questions.
Well, that's the point. You see, that's why we're not in favor of binationalism, because binationalism would mean that each national group would have a formal part of the structure. Let's say the president would be Palestinian and the speaker of the parliament would be Israeli, and now what do you do with the other groups that exist? The Africans that are here, or the Russians that are here, or the Bedouins even, and the other problem with binationalism is that it perpetuates all these boundaries. So if we want people to begin to live together and work together and identify together as a people, if they can't marry each other, if they're always saying, yeah, but I can only know you so well because you're actually a Muslim and I'm a Jew and we can't share a meal together because I can't eat with a Muslim. I mean, all those kinds of boundaries we'd like to reduce as much as we can. So we do have people that want to live, if you have ultra-Orthodox Jews or you have religious Muslims that want to live in their community by their religious law, fine. That's part of the multiculturalism. But for people, and hopefully most people, especially young people, who want to integrate and work together and live together and intermarry with each other and really become part of the new society, that should be possible. And that's more difficult if you've got these binational kinds of states. And that's the problem with Lebanon, is that Lebanon is so fragmented by each group having a piece that it won't give up and so on, that it just doesn't function. So in this sense, no, that doesn't, in other words, your national religious ethnic identity plays no role in your everyday life and of being a citizen. That's relegated, let's say, still important to your personal life. If you want to be religious, if you want your kids only to marry within your group, that's your decision, but that wouldn't be imposed by the state itself.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about point number 9. I think it's written, our role in the region. It seems to me that this shift from thinking about the Israel and Palestine, the shift from thinking about it in terms of conflict resolution to thinking about it in terms of decolonization. So we're moving from talking about this in terms of an Arab-Israeli conflict or an Israeli-Palestinian conflict to a decolonization process. Can be damning to, or an accusation, I think is a word that you use in your book, can be a bit of an accusation to the MENA, the larger region of which Israel and Palestine is a part. And I wanted to just invite you to say a little bit more about how this decolonizing, if not decolonized, if this decolonizing democratic state, the role that it would play in the region, and maybe also for the Palestinian diaspora.
Yeah, I've written in my last book, I write about global Palestine, how in fact, this conflict spills over and it encompasses a lot of the same dynamics that are happening in other parts of the world. And that's certainly true of the Middle East. You had Trump's normalization policy with the Emirates and Bahrain and Sudan and even Morocco. Jordan and Egypt were in there as well. And that's what we call transactional. Trump was a business guy and it was transactional. There was no political part to it, no moral part, no restructuring the Middle East, really. It was simply making a deal with who you had to deal with, especially to sell arms. It's good for Israel in a way. And in other words, it was a deal with the elites, the business elites, the military elites, the political elites. And that's the problem here is that it really isn't normalization or peace or reconciliation or anything with the peoples of the region. So that in a sense, we've got a similar situation where you've got these elite, really illegitimate governments, not elected, authoritarian, not supported by their people, repressive, that are speaking for their countries. And they're the ones that are making treaties and negotiating and making deals and all that stuff. And the people of the Arab world are just as oppressed as the people. They're also living under occupation, but in a kind of a military occupation in some cases, an economic occupation. You can't, in other words, you can't have a healthy, prosperous, just Palestine-Israel in a region like that. That's autocratic and that's not developing and that, where there's no democracy and so on. So that I think the idea of decolonization certainly should be applied to the wider Arab world and beyond the Arab world as well, where decolonization is going to mean Arab Springs, processes of democratization, and so on. But in many ways, if you keep backing up and backing up and backing up, that's what my last book was about. You really you have to decolonize the entire world system. I mean, the entire world system is, we're living under a very predatory neoliberal capitalism. So in many ways, maybe your situation, maybe you're a little more comfortable, but in many ways, your situation isn't tremendously different from that of most other people in the world. And that is, you have no control of your life. I think for young people in particular, you have that situation. There's a very interesting book called Left-Wing Melancholia by Traverso, an Italian Traverso. He says something interesting. I just want to throw it in here at the end. And that is that, he said that, in the beginning of the 19th century, you came into the 19th century as a young person with some hope. You had the French Revolution, you had the American Revolution, beginning concepts of human rights and stuff like that, going into the 19th century. Going into the 20th century, a young person would have some hope as well. You have socialism, you have Marxism, you've got the Russian Revolution, coming into the 21st century, what do young people have? They have dystopia. There's no socialism, there's no rights, everything's transactional, and they're living in a suffocating capitalist system that they have no control over. They're not going to get jobs. They're not going to have the security that their parents had. They're not going to be able to buy a house. In other words, the whole system is winding down for them, and they're feeling powerless to a large degree. And so that I think, in a way, if we look at Palestine and this decolonization process writ large, in some ways, what we're trying to do between Israelis and Palestinians to bring a real sense of democracy and participation and overthrow a colonial system and systems of control and structures of domination is in many ways, what has to be done regionally and then globally. So I would say that in a way, that's where this intersectionality comes in. That I've been told, I wasn't there, in Standing Rock, when the Standing Rock demonstrations were going on in the Dakotas, that if you would go there, there were more Palestinian flags there than there were American flags, because Palestine has become kind of emblematic of the struggles of oppressed peoples everywhere. So that's something we should really be trying to, and I think JVP is working on that level as well, which is very good, trying to connect the struggles. And in the end, it really is a global struggle for decolonization against global capitalism, basically.
And I think I want to get to that aspiration that this book is realist and not merely utopian. But before we get there, I just want to press you on the one democratic state. I mean, it's a statist, the statism of the whole program is a step in the direction of a just society. So this goes back to our role in the region. Like, is decolonization a process whereby just states get remade, or is there a possible future in which, because you talk a little bit in the book about the EU, but there's a disintegration of not just the nation state, but a disintegration of the state. Is that part of the aspiration? Are you withholding that? Is the state still a central piece of your analysis?
I think the states still play an important role. States. I don't think you're going to get right now beyond states, but certainly decolonization puts states in their place. And it says there's wider universal issues of democratization, of globalization, of trade, of human rights that are universal. So you don't have American human rights and French human rights and Palestinian human rights. You have human rights. So all these processes, I think, are, in a sense, freeing us from capitalism and empowering us and so on. These are universal struggles. They're not contained state by state. But but the state still plays an important role. I mean, the state is still has a monopoly over political force. The state still has a monopoly over its military forces. It's still a concentration of wealth and decision making and so on. So you can't ignore the state, I think. So I guess the idea is in the end to sort of democratize the state, open up the state, and have a kind of a, try to find a balance between state identities and state functions and mechanisms and more global mechanisms that the EU to some degree is trying to struggle with today. It's very hard because we're in a state-sponsored populist reaction in a way. So that, that's and my last book, War Against the People, of course, tried to get into how Israel is strengthening the states in their oppression of their own peoples through its military and security technologies. So we have to be aware that these, but it's a global Palestine. It's I write about the Israelization of the American police force. For example, I just had an article in a magazine called The Link, where I had an article about that. So that we can't confine these struggles to states. They spill beyond states, and we have to have. That's where you mentioned it, or it was mentioned at the beginning. When I was trying to found the People Yes Network, it hasn't really gotten off the ground, but it's that same idea, and that is that the left is missing an infrastructure. We talk about intersectionality, but it's very, very limited. And there's certain groups, and it's usually limited to countries. I mean, American groups are very American, and British groups are very British. And in a sense, if the problems are global problems, the idea of the People Yes Network was to have a network of left groups all over the world that would be in touch with each other, that would be sharing agendas, sharing strategies, instead of everybody doing it in a very siloed way. We're very siloed, the left, and the climate change people don't talk to the Black Lives Matter people, and they don't talk to the feminists, and they don't talk to the pro-Palestine people. In other words, we're all kind of siloed to some degree in our particular issues, and we have to find a way to bring us under a more common tent. So
yeah, I mean,
hopefully this book, by introducing concepts like decolonization, will begin to, inform a wider public discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're learning intersectional analysis. I want to distinguish coalition politics and the way in which the left might be bad at coalition politics from intersectional analysis and the way in which we're learning about how oppression looks very different when you're talking about multiple sources of oppression at a particular site. But I think this affirmation of the statism of the one state, one democratic state campaign is part of the next. I'm aware of that we only have 5 more minutes, and I want to observe your time. So I want to talk about the sort of realism or the anti-utopianism, and I take it that affirmation of the state and the way in which, at least for our conceivable or imaginable future, states are going to be playing a central role in our lives. So how do we bring about the one democratic state in this region? And I've already alluded to this. It sounds as though it's going to need to be imposed, at least on most Jewish Israelis. But I just wanted to invite you to say a little bit more about some of what you say in that Towards Postcoloniality chapter.
All right, just one more word, and that is, I want to correct you. I'm not criticizing JVP for their, that's a word you used a couple of times, gentle criticism. And it isn't that. It's not JVP's fault. It's that we're in a political struggle today without a political program. And that's an impossible situation because you have to have something to mobilize around and advocate for. What are you struggling for? You see, and I think, and it's happened in the Palestinian community too. I want to be honest about this. And that is that I think with the lack of a political program, nobody has been articulating. You know, the PLO in the 1970s already gave up the anti-colonial struggle and moved to a conflict resolution model of two states and got stuck in it. I mean, the PA is today stuck in a two-state kind of a thing. That's not happening. So that what's happened is over the years, as the two-state solutions receded and we're in a stalemate and nothing's happening, people have receded from a political position. There is no more political program. There's no more political organizing. And what's happened, Barbara, forgive me for saying this, what's happened is that human rights have become a substitute for a political program. You'll hear many Palestinians even today saying, we don't care if it's one state, two states, 10 states. All we want is our human rights. Give us our human rights. Well, human rights are not a political program, and they're not intended to be a political program. They're a guide, and they certainly present a certain framework, a certain way to measure where you're going, but they're not a political program. And that goes to my criticism, for example, of BDS. I mean, we've always supported BDS. It's very important. We supported BDS, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, before it was called BDS. But BDS is a tool. In other words, the three elements of BDS are not a political program. You know, the right of return, equal rights for Palestinians in Israel, and the end of the occupation. That's not those are slogans, principles, or whatever, but they're not you can't take that to the grocery store. You can't take that to Congress and say, this is our program. So unless you have a political program, you're disempowered. And to say that, well, we're for human rights, but we're not political, I think is a kind of defeatism. So that's my criticism of all the groups. It isn't that you don't have a political program, because that's not your job, as we agree. Our job as stakeholders is to insert that political program. But once that happens, once there's a political Palestinian-led voice that said, this is a political program, I think it's the job of your groups to become political and to adopt that program and to advocate it. You can't be a Palestinian support group today without a political program, in my view. And that's my criticism of where we are in general. Because let me just say half a sentence. I mean, you know, the US campaign, JVP to a large degree, and a lot of the other organizations have very, very little to do with us. We're not in touch with each other. They don't talk much to Palestinians. They certainly don't talk much to Israeli activists. And in a way, all those groups have their own agendas and their own budgets, and they're doing whatever they're doing. But I think they've gotten more and more disconnected from what's happening here. So I think what I'm trying to work on is to reattach, is to give that political direction and focus, not me, but our One Democratic State group, to, in order to mobilize all of you politically, and not only for human rights.
Thank you. So may I have 5 more minutes of your time? Is that okay?
Ask the other people. You can have 5 more hours of my time. I can out Castro.
Let me ask you. So I just now want to speak as a JVP member, not as, I certainly don't speak for the organization. But if I tried to put a pin in it, why I think there is a gentle criticism is when I think to myself, and I could have just been mistaken, but when I think to myself about why I endorse BDS as a movement, I mean, first and foremost, I endorse it because it was called for by Palestinian civil society. But as I understand that call, it's a call that is on the conflict resolution model of understanding what's going on in the region, because it's a call to either equalize the power at the negotiation table, or at least remove some of the power that Israeli brokers or brokers on behalf of the state of Israel might have. And I think that what you're asking us to do is now reimagine BDS. And it seemed to me that there was a place in your story that there is a new place for international responsibility for bringing about a decolonizing process for something like BDS. But now it's got this very different
Let me
thought.
just say that, in my view, the three elements of BDS, they were formulated 20 years ago. In the year 2000 is when they formulated. The BDS call was in 2005, but those three elements were from a previous call of 2000. So that's more than 20 years ago. It was a little bit of a different situation then. And they reflect the two-state idea. If you think about it, one of the principles is end the occupation. You see, and what I'm trying to do is get beyond the word occupation, even get beyond apartheid, because we're not talking about 22% of the country, we're talking about the whole country. That's where the settler colonial model comes in. Another element is equal rights for Palestinian citizens of Israel. So here you've got the occupation here, Israel here. It's that same, like you say, that same dichotomy that's based on a conflict model. I think it has to be revamped, especially in light of the settler colonial analysis. It's actually, that whole thing has come about in the last 20 years. So there's a new analysis now. So if we have a new analysis, it's leading us towards a new political program. BDS should reflect that, because BDS is a tool, and it has to be organically connected to, in other words, its demands have to be connected to what our political struggle is. And if we come across saying we want one state, a democracy and decolonization, and then we're going and we're talking about equal rights for Palestinian citizens of Israel and end the occupation, we're contradicting ourselves. We have two different models, two different set of demands within the same struggle. So I think that is something I think it's going to come about. But, the problem is the BDS can't be a standalone kind of a campaign. It has to be connected to a political program. And the political program in the end has to define the BDS elements, in my view.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'd love to have another hour-long conversation about what is the political program, because I might just disagree with you about what the political program is with BDS. But I just wanted to give the last moment over to a recognition that this is both both a hopeful book and an optimistic book, which I found very heartwarming. So the optimism is that you think we're at a stalemate and that neither side can win. And then you talk a little bit about your sources of hope. And so I just wanted to invite you to say more for those who haven't read the book about your sense of optimism and or what's giving you hope these days.
Well, I mean, I don't like really the word hope too much. I'm not religious. I don't deal with, I deal with struggle. The word is struggle. When corporations decided they wanted to rule the world, they didn't hope they're going to rule the world. Politicians don't hope they're going to win the election. If you're strategic and you have a plan and you're organized and you find allies and really mobilize them, then you can you can prevail in a struggle. You can be I want to, again, there's a connection between being an activist, a Palestinian activist, and being an activist in general in the left. I see myself as part of the left, like a lot of you. And I think our problem is that we don't see ourselves as political actors, unlike the right. Certainly the settlers see themselves as political actors. The right wing in the US sees itself as a political actor. We don't on the left. We see ourselves, we're critical, we're commentators, we're gadflies, we're protesters, we're resistors, but we don't jump into the political arena. And it has to do with our sectarianism and all of that as well. But we don't do that. And so we're really not, we don't have much clout. And what I'm trying to say, at least if we can get behind a political program like the One Democratic State program, and we organize, in other words, if we really organize with you guys abroad and we have a strategy, and we know where we're going, and we know what our plan is, yes, I think that we can. And that's what happened in South Africa. That the strength of the international civil society, of people all over the world collectively, is much more than they're aware of. I think the strength of the Palestinians is much more than they're aware of. I don't think Israel's in a very strong position. Israel is strong with governments, that's true, but that's very thin. I think Israel's already lost it in the court of public opinion. And that's why they're so shrill about anti-Semitism and BDS and all of that, because they're losing. They're even losing in the Jewish community among young people in the States. So I really have a basis for being optimistic in that I can define my allies and I can see the intersectionality part, the coalition building part. I can see common things that I can build with my allies. So if we can get our act together and have this plan and strategize and give some leadership to all of this, with the idea that we are really political actors, that this is not utopia, this isn't some academic exercise. That's why we put so much thought into the program. We want our program to be a genuine political program that we can bring to the people, bring to governments, and say, this is a political program that's doable, that's workable, that's just. It isn't just some set of slogans, you see? And if we can do that, I think we can win. I think we can prevail in this struggle. And that's where I kind of go beyond hope. Hope for me isn't a very encouraging word. If you're hoping, you're not in a very strong situation. You've got to really struggle and be prepared for the struggle.
Jeff Halper, thank you so much. This is your new book, Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine. I'm so grateful that you took your time to talk with us today and that you shared this really wealth of wisdom and experience with us.
All right. And I love JVP. I'm not, if there's any criticism, it's constructive as friends and colleagues, begin to work together and so on. So I want to leave that message because I really see JVP as a very important partner of ours.
Well, as you know,
thank you very much for having me.
The love is going both directions. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to close out with a little message about our what's coming up next, and I just wanted to remind people about our ongoing connection to We Are Not Numbers. Last month we were graced with the presence of Alice Rothschild, who actually is the person who is accepting applications for people who would like to mentor stories. So if you're a writer who's out there, who is a published writer and knows something about narrative journalism, she would very much like you to be in touch with her. And we look forward to seeing all of you again in another month. We don't have a new program to announce to you, but we have several really exciting ideas that we're percolating on, and we hope to be in contact with you by email. Take care.